Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Go ahead and grab a Bible and find the 69th Psalm. And let me just jump right into it. Need to do some introduction here, lay a little foundational information about this psalm. The psalm, obviously, the superscription says it is a psalm of David. Even though that is there are some who doubt or question whether David was actually the author or not, because as we go through this psalm, we're going to see that this psalm describes a very difficult persecution. And no, we don't know of a particular instance that correlates in David's life. But we have to remember that David was not only a poet, a songwriter, but David was also a prophet. The other thing to remember in this psalm is, even though we may not know of an event in David's life, a circumstance that corresponds to the nature of this psalm, doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It means that it wasn't recorded. Now, that being said, it is extremely important to remember that this is a prophetic psalm. It does look forward to the persecution and suffering of Jesus Christ. It is, again, a very prophetic, messianic psalm. It is, again, a prayer in response to persecution. And again, we don't know for certain that it wasn't an actual event in David's life. We just don't know exactly what that event would have been. Now, this psalm is extremely important. This psalm is the most referenced, most quoted psalm in the New Testament, or excuse me, that one of, I should say it that way, it is one of the most referenced psalms. This one, the 22nd and the 110th. Would be the three most quoted psalms. And so as we dig into it, we again, it is a prayer for persecution, so it can serve as a model for you and I today as we go through tests. We all have tribulations. We all have persecution and things that happen to us. But again, keep in mind that this is a prophetic psalm. And again, it is a prayer that we could pray, I think, as well, that especially here in America, that many people around the world, remembering that we need to remember and realize that many people around the world are suffering for their faith, that they are being persecuted, executed for their faith. And so hopefully this psalm will be a challenge and encouragement for us to pray for our fellow believers around the world as we learn, again, model here of how, of a prayer for a time of persecution. And so with that background, let's jump into these first handful of verses, and we're going to go back and we're going to see a common theme that we have seen, discussed numerous times through the first 68 Psalms. We're going to see it again as we start into this Psalm, that in persecution, that in those times, that our only resource, that the place we turn to is the Lord. So this first verse reminds us of that. Save me, O God, for the waters are come in unto my soul. And so the psalmist here, David, immediately he is in some terrible situation. Certainly we can, again, if we keep in mind this is a prophetic, messianic psalm, we know the circumstance that Christ was in. And so the psalmist, again, we see this message once again. Perhaps some of you who have been with us from the beginning, you may be getting weary of hearing this theme repeated over and over. But I think it's a solid reminder for us because I think many times we do tend to forget that. We try to handle our problems and our circumstances on our own. We try to solve our own problems, and then only when we have exhausted all of our resources and we are ready to give up, then many times then we go to the Lord. And I think it's important to remember that over and over and over again we have seen in the Psalm this calling out to the Lord. When our circumstances here, as he says, are overwhelming, as we continue to look in these verses, verse 2, I sink in deep mire where there is no standing. I am coming to deep waters where the floods overflow me. I am weary of my crying. My throat is dried. Mine eyes fail while I wait on my God. And so certainly describing an overwhelming situation, and perhaps you might can empathize with some of David's feelings here, some of his words, that we feel like sometimes our circumstances, we feel like we are in deep waters, that the waters are just that we're drowning in our situation. I'm weary of my crying, he says. I have cried so much, I'm tired of crying. I've literally heard people say that before. I've cried so much. I've heard people say, I've cried so much, I don't think I have any tears left in me. And that's where the psalmist is. Cried out till his throat hurt, till his throat was dry. And so we see a terrible situation that is, and perhaps you can identify with this. His situation is made worse. The external situation is being made worse by the discouragement that he feels, that he is stuck in the mire, and he has these feelings, and I think those are all images that each of us at some point in our life can identify with, that we are stuck in the mud, that we're not making any progress. And again, he's just exhausted, and that's making it his situation so much worse. And then finally here this morning in verse 4, he says, they that hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of my head, that he would they that would destroy me, being my enemies wrongfully, are mighty. Then I restored that which I took not away. And so David gives us some indication here of the circumstances. And whether we look at this psalm as a situation in David's life, or consider the messianic implications of it, that Christ certainly was in a situation where his enemies seemed to be more than the hairs on his head. They hated him for certainly no cause, as David says here, and so. You may can identify with that as well. Sometimes it feels like that we are being attacked for no reason. They hate him for no purpose. They're making false accusations against him and spreading gossip and lies. Certainly we are familiar with that in our life today, that unfortunately happens. And so David says something here. He says, and then I restored that which I took not away. And so what David says here is something, again, that maybe you can identify with as well. David says, I went out and I tried to make right for something that I didn't do. That's what he means by that statement. I restored that which I took not. He says, I restored. I paid back something that I wasn't even guilty of, that I hadn't done. I made retribution for something that I hadn't committed, and certainly we can see the messianic implications of that as Christ made retribution for sin that was not his own. The beatings and the torment and the crucifixion that he took were not his own, and so this morning, as we begin to consider this psalm, I think these first four verses remind us that this is certainly a psalm that you and I can identify with, that we occasionally in our lifetime face just overwhelming situation. We feel like we are drowning and we need the help of God. And maybe that's the reason that we see this psalm referred to so often in the New Testament, is because God knew that you and I are going to be able, we could identify with it, and furthermore that we don't always heed it. We don't obey it, follow the example that is given to us here of when we find ourselves in trying times, that we cry out to God, that we trust Him, that we turn to Him. And again, as I said to begin with, many times we do everything we can. And then we go to God, and the model couldn't be clearer in the first 69 Psalms that we've looked at. Over and over again, we have seen this theme that we go to the Lord. I don't know if it's pride, I don't know if it's fear, if we just forget what exactly the issue is that keeps us from crying out to Him in our time of need. But this morning, as we wrap up here, let me encourage you that whatever circumstance you find yourself in this morning, whatever you're going through, maybe it's not as desperate as David's, but you are in trying times, you feel like you're stuck in the mire, as David says. Don't forget your number one resource. Don't forget your number one place to call out, and that's to the Lord Himself, and trust Him. And as the old song goes, cast our every burden, cast our every care on the Lord. All right, hope that helps you through the day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning.